All right, we'll get started. I think everybody's here. If you haven't signed in, obviously when we take a break or at the end, make sure you do sign in so you get your credit. Hopefully you are here for the reasonable suspicion for supervisor's class. I don't know what other classes would be going on right now, but this is for supervisors. Are there any non-supervisors in here just here for general information? Okay, good. Getting ahead of the game. Always build that resume. So, whether we're formal supervisors or informal supervisors with our coworkers, reasonable suspicion kind of comes up as something that's put on the supervisor, and we'll talk about what reasonable suspicion is. And what we're here to talk about is primarily people under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and some of the key things to be on the lookout for. And technology is awesome because it worked earlier. So goals today, we're going to be able to identify some substances and their effects. I'm willing to bet that everyone in here has at least a question about one type of substance or another that they may come across, whether it's their employees or the citizens that the employees come in contact with. So we'll talk about some of that. We'll define reasonable suspicion. Responsibilities as a supervisor and even as a coworker with individuals. And we're going to hopefully increase your knowledge when it comes to how employees' exposure and having what their exposure to these substances might be, whether it's medications or illicit drugs in the field. Of course, you get one, and it goes twice. So, before we go over some of the definitions in the policy, in the admin regulation, I'd like to thank our crew in the back who's going to help me and help you answer any questions that may pop up. We have a representative from legal, from risk, and HR. So if I can have you folks stand up so everybody can get to know your faces and names. So we'll start with Derek. Does everybody know Derek? He's going unfortunately. No. Move on down the line. Just say your name.
Jamie Roth, Deputy City Attorney.
Awesome.
Beth Serrana, HR Assistant Director.
Thank you. And just here. Just sitting really close to Beth. Awesome. All right.
That's Emily with HR.
Well, I couldn't recognize Emily because, you know, I don't know the eyes yet. So, one of the definitions we need to work on is what a safety-sensitive position is in the city. This is one that you're going to come across. Can anybody think of any safety-sensitive positions? You can probably look at the definition and kind of start ballparking what some things they might be doing. A lineman over at LPC. Police. Fire. Equipment operators. Okay, so it's some form of technician level over, what's the big umbrella for? Okay, so public works, utilities, so all the technician type stuff. Can a librarian be doing a safety sensitive type task? I don't know, do I have anybody from the library here? Okay. Can a librarian be doing a safety-sensitive type task?
Yeah.
Okay, like what?
Interacting with anybody that might come in, I feel like. But,
okay.
I mean, if someone is in and they're on something or even ODing, I think you're having a safety-sensitive task.
Okay, well, that's a safety-sensitive task that you're dealing with at the moment. Obviously, by these two examples in the definitions, any CDL, so technicians, authorized to carry a firearm or provide medical services or handle controlled substances, but operating any motor vehicle. So if a library employee is in a vehicle running and picking up supplies or going out and about, driving a vehicle on that kind of status, that can be a safety sensitive job at hand. Working one-on-one with children obviously would fall under that, because we want to make sure our employees in that position are sober, and in general transporting the public. So one of the lead program, law enforcement assisted diversion, our case managers up here at 500 Kimbark, they escort individuals back to their office now and then, people experiencing homelessness. They'll bring them back to the office to help them work on getting into programs and services and that sort of thing. Because they're in that position, they're transporting members of the public, they're in a safety sensitive position. Some other terms that you might hear me say, I know everybody knows it as marijuana, but cannabis overall encompasses the marijuana, the hemp, other items in there. So this cannabis covers all strains of marijuana. So there's no, and one of my things is in my background is I focus on the technical big umbrella of all categories of drugs. So when it comes to cannabis, you're going to hear me say that. That basically means marijuana. You can kind of par it down, but I'm thinking big umbrella. You don't have to go that big. Just think anything having to do with marijuana or its components, if you will. Does anybody here, I know we have all them in the back, but does anybody here have knowledge of, not necessarily experience, of the things that are in cannabis? Things you've heard. What are some of the drugs or the chemicals inside cannabis? Delta 9 THC. Okay. So you may see it written just as THC, or you'll see the delta sign with a 9 for shorthand. Anybody ever heard of Delta 8? That's the latest big thing in getting hot, legally high. It's a derivative. It's another subchemical within the cannabis plant that has similar psychoactive effects as the Delta 9, but it's chemically different, so it doesn't show up on a lot of tests. CBDs. Anybody heard of that before? Might hear of that floating around. Might know somebody, hopefully not in a safety sensitive position, that takes CBDs to help with anxiety, depression, muscle pains and fatigue, back pain especially. A lot of that kind of circulating around and being advertised commercially. Hemp oils, generally speaking, have very, very, very minuscule amounts of the Delta 9 THC in them. So in theory, you're not going to test positive with it. But if you're using a lot of lotion, because THC will absorb through the skin, but if you're using a lot of it all day, every day, there is a possibility. Who here has heard of kratom? You have, obviously. Okay, kratom is another plant product. It is very popular right now. It is not illegal as of yet. It comes from, I believe, Central and Southeast Asia areas, and it's chewed on, consumed in tea form as well, for everything from waking people up to controlling pain, and it is advertised as such. Usually comes in powders in the US. You can get some plant product to make teas, but it's out and about. So CBD, as we kind of went into already, is advertised as relieving pain for anxiety, depression. PTSD is another big one. So a lot of people pick up on this. There's CBD for your dogs, cats, everything, to help with whatever. People have jumped on board with marijuana is all natural, marijuana is the cure-all, God gave us marijuana to be happy, go forth and whatever. So unfortunately, that when we open that Pandora's box of cannabis, That's exactly what it was. All this stuff started coming out that we didn't know about because, all right, it's outside the realm of whatever, but back in high school in the 1900s, did anybody have any experience with marijuana? Maybe. Okay. Here's a funny story. Do you guys remember what the percentage of THC was in cannabis 1980s, 1990s? Tops was about 4%. That was the Acapulco Gold, the BC Bud, the best thing you can find on the street. Do you know what they get for that right now? Bumkiss. What they're selling at the dispensaries right now is 20 to 50%. And that's just the plant. Then you go into cannabis concentrates, wax, shatter, little, it looks like almost earwax. Thus the name. They smoke that. That's pushing 60, 70%. And then you can actually get distillates, which they have gotten up to 90, 95%. So what we used to have in high school back in the 1900s was 3-2 beer. They're now drinking everything from Jack Daniels to Everclear in the same amount of inhale through a pipe or a joint. So think about that when you start seeing people on various different kinds of cannabis. And we don't know the long-term effects. We're coming up with some of that. And we don't know what CBD by itself does. One of the interesting things about CBD is it actually has to have THC for it to work completely within the body. So getting plain THC-free CBD doesn't give you the full health benefit for these things that we're taking it for. You may see people telling you that you're not going to test positive if you take CBD without THC in it. I can tell you right now, I know a firsthand guy who does mobile lab urinalysis for oil rigs and truck driving companies and things like that out in Fort Morgan. He goes all the way from Greeley out to Nebraska, Kansas area. And the randoms that he comes across, everybody that tests positive for THC, well, I just take CBDs. Sucks to be you, you tested positive. So, again, it says the CBD will not show up, but the THC does. And again, CBD doesn't have its full effect because it has to have that key, if you will, kind of like insulin and sugar. If anybody has any friends or family with diabetes, you know, sugar builds up in the system unless it has the insulin to unlock it, to allow the body to process it and get it into the brain and that sort of thing. Same sort of thing with the CBD and the THC. Kind of a refresher here, kratom, tropical trees, Southeast Asia. The psychotropic effect that we see is very similar to that of the opiates. So your heroin, fentanyl, that sort of thing. Except for some strains, like marijuana, have a euphoric effect that actually elevates the mood initially until you get to higher levels. One of the things about kratom is you may get a false positive for methadone. So I know this is a reasonable suspicion class, but if you're in a safety sensitive or CDL type position where your randoms may be a thing for CDL holders, if somebody comes up as hot or positive for methadone, one of the things to be aware of is kratom may be a factor. And does anybody know what kind of testing we use for reasonable suspicion or post-crash type incident? A urine test. Is that good or bad? It's not great. Okay, why is it not great? Well, depends on, I guess, your perspective, and we'll talk about a few things here. But if you test positive, does that mean you're high right now? No. Especially if we look at plant-type products, kratom and cannabis. We get a false positive for methadone here. You may get a false positive for heroin if you eat too much of what? Poppy seed bagels. Specifically the poppy seeds. If you have poppy seeds on everything and drink poppy seed tea, you may get a false positive for heroin. So these are things to kind of keep in mind when people may come up positive on something. Urine is a waste product of the body. It's not what's circulating in our blood affecting our brain right now. It's what's sitting on the way out. It's already done its job, if you will. So with kratom, cannabis, the thing that tests positive in urine is called carboxy-THC. You don't need to know all this. This is just flex the brain a little bit for you. But carboxy-THC can stay in your system. I think the record that they have documented is up to 45 days. Average is about 30. So if somebody went to, say, Amsterdam, and they're in a safety-sensitive position, and they had one joint in Amsterdam on the 1st of July, and they get in a crash or something happens that they have to take a urine test, say July 25th, is it possible that they're going to test positive? Yes. Is it possible or is it probable that they're sober? Yeah. I mean, it's been 25 or whatever days. So that's the downfall of urine, is it has a long history. Some of this stuff stays in our systems. So when we talk about reasonable suspicion, we're going to want to document all of our stuff. So I'm going to read it since it's really long here. This is a legal standard. This is what the lawyers are going to want to use in case we have to do some sort of action. But long story short, so I can project my voice across the room here, reasonable suspicion is a legal standard of proof in the United States law that is less than probable cause. You probably don't even know what that is. That's a standard we have to meet on the criminal level. So you have to meet a level here, there's probable cause, and then there's the infamous beyond a reasonable doubt in court. So we're here-ish. Okay? The legal standard for arrests and warrants, which is the probable cause, but more than an in cahoot and unparticularized suspicion or hunch. So it must be based on specific and articulable facts taken together with rational inferences from those facts, and the suspicion must be associated with the specific individual. Big, long definition to say what? I'm going to use my co-worker, Miss Calvetti, here. So if I'm come in and I see that she's kind of sleepy and her eyes are excessively bloodshot, and when I walk by her, I'm not an expert, I don't hang out at the bars, but I smell something that smells like an alcoholic beverage coming from her breath or from her person. Am I at reasonable suspicion yet? You said yes? Why do you say yes?
The way I always think of this is, would a reasonable person suspect that something is amiss?
Okay.
I would say yes.
So, if I walk by, we'll just say she's our subject still. I walk by this area and I smell the odor of alcohol. Is it immediate that I can identify her as the person? So I can't specifically say she's the one that I believe is under the influence or has been drinking. But I now have a group of people to kind of take a closer look at. So I don't have a hunch she's been drinking. I have a hunch that somebody in this area has been drinking. But as I look at the group, she's the only one that's kind of got the bloodshot, watery eyes. It's more vocal than she is normally, or less vocal than she is normally. frequently popping in new pieces of gum. Why would she be chewing more gum than usual? Cover up the odor. Okay? So now we're getting into that rational inferences. And I'm going to probably want to get, well, we'll get to in a little bit, but a second opinion. So what if I'm sitting in my office doing whatever end of the month reports I got to do, and somebody says, oh yeah, I know Calvetti's been drinking on the job. Can I go over and have her tested? Nope. Because that's just a general, no, it's hearsay basically, right? So I can't just hear somebody might be drinking or taking drugs. I have to have a legitimate reason to ask her or to actually order her to take a test. So if I ask her to come into my office after somebody says, hey, we were at lunch and what she drank seemed to be something alcoholic. Some, I don't know, fuzzy something. What's a fuzzy navel? I don't know. You should know all these drinks, but everybody drinks beer in Colorado. She has an old fashioned. There you go. She's drinking some whiskey. Yeah, for lunch. Because that's what we do, right? But so she has something, and somebody's like, yeah, it didn't look like iced tea. It looked more like a Long Island iced tea, if you know what I'm saying. So I asked her to come in. She's now by herself. She has an odor of alcohol about her person that wasn't there before she walked in. She has, say, bloodshot, watery eyes. She has slurred speech that she didn't have this morning. Now I have more and more little things that I can get to that point that a reasonable person would go, yeah, it's probably reasonable to believe she's been drinking at lunch. So before we get to that, that's where we get to that reasonable. And do you as an individual supervisor have to determine what is reasonable and what is not? Who says yes? Who says no? Who has no clue and doesn't want to participate? All right, at least one. All right. Guess what? Part of the reason I introduced the folks back here is because not only do you have your executive director for your department or your area of the city, you have risk, you have HR, and you have legal who are going to want to participate in determining if you have reasonable suspicion and helping walk you through the process when it happens. Because you can have taken this class with me 32 times and you're still going to go to the resources I'm about to share here in the next few slides to make sure you check off all the boxes. And you'll probably want another supervisor in your area to come in and help you determine what all is going on. So what are the challenges for you as a supervisor when it comes to this? I'm going to start over here. Give me one.
A reasonable suspicion for a supervisor, someone's coming in and their eyes are glazed over and
Dazed, confused, and glazed over. Okay. Well, that's one of the challenges, is being able to articulate why that's something that leads towards reasonable suspicion. But where does our workforce come from?
oh, me again?
Well, to clarify, to add up a little bit, where does our workforce come from?
Outside of the workplace.
Well, it's outside the workplace, but it's our city. It's outside the city. It's people around us. It's our community. Are there people in our community that do cannabis? Are there people in our community that drink alcohol? Are there people in our community that have medical conditions and take medications prescribed by a doctor that may impair their ability to operate a vehicle safely? Yeah. And we want to work with people that do these things, but not necessarily when they're at work. Medications. Here's where I'm going to differ from the law that you might read. There's a difference between under the influence and impaired by. Why do I say that? If you take some aspirin, are you impaired by aspirin when your headache goes away? Are you impaired by it? Your headache is impaired by it, but are you as a person impaired? Are you able to operate a vehicle safely, to do your tasks, go inside and outside in the sunlight, so on and so forth? Okay, so you're not necessarily impaired, but you are under its influence because you are no longer suffering the effects of that headache. Make sense? What about somebody who takes the prescribed amount of, say, an antidepressant they've been on for a while? Are they under the influence of it? Yeah. Are they impaired by it? Not necessarily. But if they change their dosage or they haven't taken their dosages, they might be impaired. Sideball question. Is a hangover a medical condition? Who says yes? Hangover is a medical condition, a justifiable reason for calling in sick. You are literally a medical condition not to come in. Yeah, in a court of law, it's been deemed a medical condition. You are now withdrawing from alcohol. Your body is not operating level. So you're actually impaired by not having alcohol in your system anymore. Your body's trying to balance things out. Obviously, we don't want that person at work because they're impaired without alcohol now. Not that we want them to drink to come in. Okay? So our workforce comes from our community, our society. Do they change after we hire them? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes life gets in the way and they look for coping mechanisms, mental health issues kick in, family stressors, all that fun stuff starts to build up, and they look to drugs, alcohol, medications, and a whole plethora of other things to cope. Sometimes they don't change when they come to work for us, and they continue. They were able to abstain long enough to do the pre-hire test, urine test, but immediately jumped back on the train, if you will, and started smoking cannabis every night to go to sleep. Anybody dealt with cannabis there's a wake-up cannabis and a go-to-sleep cannabis? Oh, yeah. There's a wake-up cannabis and a go-to-sleep cannabis. Sativa is your wake-up, indica is your go-to-sleep. Couch is what indica comes from. You get stuck into couch. So we talked about, already kind of hit on it, what influences are in their lives. Again, family, coworkers, bosses, and everything else people deal with. Some get help, some don't, but they find their ways out. Or they find their way into an addiction issue. Apparently we need new batteries. Who here has dealt with a friend or family member that got injured and as a result became addicted to pain meds? Probably one of the saddest arrests I ever made was a woman who was called in, we call them ready reports, report every drunk driver immediately. So somebody called 911 because they saw a woman driving with her knee, holding foil in one hand, had a straw in her mouth, and was heating up her heroin to freebase heroin on 287 coming into Longmont. She had difficulty seeing out of her left eye. She had I don't mean to be mean, but kind of the evil scar across the eye like this, like the bad guy in all the movies. I asked her where that came from. Drunk driver hit her head on 287 at 52, 4 or 5 years prior. Because of the massive injuries that she suffered, she got addicted to pain pills. Doctors then came in, cut her off because, ooh, we have an opiate crisis in America. Well, just because they cut you off doesn't mean that addiction's not there anymore. So where did she turn? The streets. Started smoking heroin. And now has her own DUI. Oh, the person that hit her head on was a drunk driver. So now she's getting arrested for doing essentially what put her in this position. So we can have those injuries at home. We can have those injuries in the workplace. Relationships in both. Family members. You know, everybody's got a family member somewhere. Or at least at one point in their life they did. And sometimes that's very stressful. They do things that you don't want them to do that make their lives worse, and you project your concerns essentially out for their behavior. Or relationships at work, co-workers, bosses, I already talked about it. So drugs are a part of our city, part of our peers. All demographics, from the poorest person in the city to the richest person in the city or group of people, are affected. Doesn't matter, skin color, sex, gender, any of it. It's around us, and everybody gets, every part of every group, it gets affected. And has a representative, if you will, using those as their form. Another homeless person that, I don't even think she's with us anymore, unfortunately, but she was a registered nurse. Some of the, I don't know if even you're old enough to remember Dawn, but she was a registered nurse in a domestic violence relationship. Finally got to the point that she snapped and stood up for herself and beat the tar out of the abusive husband. Got arrested for it. Wasn't in Longmont. Got jail time, protection orders, all the stuff. Lost her licensing for nursing, and basically ended up homeless, on drugs, whatever drugs were on the street and available, and alcohol. So those relationships affect everybody. So as a supervisor, we're tasked with making sure our employees have a safe and secure work environment. Obviously, that's the immediate in-house stuff. Some of us that have to deal with the public a little closer, we have to take our precautions when we can, but that starts opening the door that we have less control over. But in-house, our employees, our subordinates, and their co-workers, we need to make sure they're in a safe place. Inform and educate your staff on the expectations and zero tolerance policy of the substance use and abuse at work. Consequences, share them. You know, I don't know how often each of your departments have the talk about, you know, this, how this affects not only you, but your co-workers, your family, etc. Because it affects, if somebody shows up intoxicated, not only does it affect them and they get admin leave or whatever the case might be, ultimately potentially fired, but what else do we have? We've now left the team short. We've now started that whole drama at the workplace, and it could potentially be a safety issue. Somebody doesn't do something at the right time and causes injury or worse. So what should we be watching for? We always look back at the big bad things that happen in the world and we say, oh, the red flags were super obvious. They were right there. Well, yeah, now we're looking at hindsight, which is always 2020, yay. Sometimes even better than 2020. So how do we catch them before things go wrong?
Day-to-day interactions with your people.
Day-to-day interactions with your people. Know your people. Knowing your employee is, I don't know, I guess C would be the average, right? So they're a B, maybe B plus employee. A little extra effort than, say, somebody that just shows up and does their proverbial 40 hours a week. Suddenly drops down to that C minus type behavior. Just putting in the minimums. Is something up? Could be. Could it be drugs or alcohol? Could it be mental health? I've over the last several years parred this with the mental health because there's so many things about drugs and alcohol that look like mental health issues. And one of the things that we need to take a look at is if somebody's performance is declining and they can't put their finger on it, what's a supervisor supposed to do? Hound them that you're not working overtime like you used to, or you never used to do this? No, they need to kind of dig and find out what's going on. How do you dig? What's that? Am I going to tell you what's going on in my life if I haven't developed trust in you? So if you're just now finally getting interested in my life, am I going to share that my wife of 30 years just left me or whatever? I'm just picking numbers, so don't be getting all concerned for me. Probably not. But if you've developed that relationship ahead of time and not just been over in the office doing whatever, you'll be able to pick up those changes and determine, hey, is it mental health or is it something we need to look at that reasonable suspicion stuff a little closer? And then we can look at the other programs for the mental health side. And then we can catch it before it goes wrong and hopefully keep it from going wrong and steer it back on the right path so they can keep their job, have that stability in their life, so they can work on the one thing that's troubling them through EAP or all the other things we have through Kaiser and all the other resources. But if we don't catch it, I keep trusting you, clicker. There we go. So I keep kind of foreshadowing for you, but it's that significant unexplained deterioration in job performance. Is that drugs or is that mental health? Who here, if you don't mind sharing, who here has a friend or family member or knows somebody that is diabetic and has had a diabetic emergency? Okay. If you don't mind me asking, what did that person act like when they were starting to go into their diabetic emergency?
Well, we didn't know about it because we didn't find them until after the fact.
Okay.
We did a wellness check.
Okay.
And found them passed out on the floor and then got the emergency care that they needed.
Okay. So you didn't get to see the
I didn't get
build
to
up
see
or
the-
decline, whichever way you want to look at it.
They can have intoxicated, aggressive times.
Okay. So they can look, act, sound, and generally behave like a drunk person. Fun fact, it's been close to, if not over 20 years, so I think it's okay to share the quasi-story of it. No names will be dropped. But there was a prominent person that might have worked in this room that was tased by the Longmont Police Department who was going through a diabetic emergency while driving and started fighting the cops when they stopped him or her. It wasn't until they were tased and handcuffed that they figured out, oh, this is not a drunk, this is a sugar. Call the fire department. So they got the glucose and everything else. Because drunks and diabetics can often look very close to each other's behavior because the brain is not functioning correctly. Which is, again, why I bring up the importance of this. Because is it mental health or is it substance abuse? Or, as they infamously say, a combination of the two. So, they aren't what they used to be. They aren't the go-getter they used to be. Or they're more go-getter. They've bumped up their game. What might be a good maybe idea of a drug that might speed up your production? Very popular in Longmont. Meth? Yes, meth. So it's possible that meth is helping them get a little extra production to get your boss's boss off their back. So they went from that employee to the proverbial that employee. Significant change in their personality. They went from the happy-go-lucky to the everything sucks, or they go from everything sucks to life is great and I'm just here enjoying life. Yes, it can swing both ways. And that's potentially concerning because, again, is it reasonable suspicion or mental health? So if it's a drug-free workplace issue, actually, even if you don't know yet, HR is here to help you. Call your HR representatives. They will help walk you through is this reasonable suspicion or employees burned out and need some mental health support. Don't isolate yourself and try to solve this on your own. That's your mistake. This is going to be a team effort to fix whatever's going on. And you ever been so close to a problem you didn't see the problem? You suspected something, but you didn't actually want to admit, or whatever the case might be, that there's a problem? You being able to bounce something off a fellow supervisor or upper level supervisor or HR will help them go, well, yeah, of course you got a problem we need to deal with. Because sometimes, because we have that relationship, we don't want to necessarily see it. So, behavioral signs we may see. Tardiness. General attendance issues, not showing up at all. No call, no show. Because they overslept and because they were hungover or something. Decline in performance or productivity. Acting withdrawn from others or overly sensitive. Money problems or borrowing or stealing money. Might be an issue, right? We can use this. We use this stuff at our home. If somebody's stealing money from mom's purse, are they having a problem at home? Something's going on. Is it just stealing, or are they buying other things with it? Unexplained changes in their personality or attitude. Again, sudden increase in their attitude or personality, or sudden decrease. Or not a gradual decline necessarily, but they're not the person they used to be. In not a good way. That sudden mood changes or irritability. Inappropriate laughing. Don't come over to the police department. There's a lot of that. Unexplained fear or paranoia. If you deal with the public, you probably deal with a lot of that. At least the paranoia part of things. Inability to focus or concentrate. So you know your employees. Hopefully, I encourage you to get to know employees better. I guess it's kind of a good thing. I started my adulthood in the military. So if you kind of worked your way up, you got to the point where you're promoted, and what's the first thing to do when you promote in the military? Send you somewhere else. Because now you're not leading the people you grew up with, and you don't have that friendship and the interference of, yeah, but I know Paul, and he's got good things going for him. He didn't mean to blow up the Humvee. So they separate that so you can establish that leadership sort of position. One of the things we need to know is, who else knows what's going on in the workplace? The other employees. There's always, rumor mills, gossip. Gossip is kind of like that underlying, it's not probable cause or reasonable suspicion, but it might be something you need to look into. So if somebody is allegedly drinking before they come in, or their smoke break is out in their car on the other side of the parking lot for some reason during lunch, maybe that needs to be investigated. In and of itself, not a reason to order the requested for the urine test, but those are our kind of reasons. Resources for individuals. All these are available on the Inside Longmont page. If it's not like your doctor or healthcare provider. But Boulder County Mental Health, Community Substance Abuse Prevention Programs, National Drug and Alcohol Treatment Referral Routing Service, EAP, the Veterans Administration, VA, for those that have served. They have a lot of programs. And this is, again, if they have substance abuse issues. EAP also for mental health stuff. So behaviors overflow into the workplace. Eventually they, have a couple drinks to go to work and can get through the day, but then eventually that doesn't work out. And I'm going to use alcohol because everybody seems to know how alcohol works. So they get the edge off in the morning, come to work, but now it doesn't last all day like it used to, and now they're struggling after lunch, so now they have a couple at lunch, and then a couple in the morning, a couple at lunch doesn't quite get them to the end of the day, so a couple in the middle on a break, and a couple in the middle in the afternoon. And what is the drink of choice for alcoholics who are functional alcoholics still working? There's two. Vodka and gin. Gin a little less so because it does have more floral notes in it so that people can kind of pick up on it. But generally speaking, especially the higher end vodkas, have no odor. But they'll get flavored because vodka tastes like stuff. So they'll have blueberry or they'll have raspberry vodka. And they obviously come in very cool travel size containers about yay big. So you can just put them in your purse, backpack. Nobody wears fanny packs anymore, but you can stash them in your center console in your car. Nobody knows what you're drinking, or you pop it into your soda can when you're out in the car on your break, whatever. So those are popular. So if you see those show up, might be an issue. Obviously, educating your team to be aware of what's going on around you. If you see a problem, say something, is huge. If you're really good friends, started at the same time, you promoted before they did, maybe that's why they're drinking. I'm kidding. But now you're friends in a supervisory versus employee role. You may overlook some of this stuff because you've been friends for 15, 20 years, whatever. If you overlook it and you knowingly overlook it, you're becoming an enabler. And there are certain ramifications if you did know, and they'll correct me in the back if I'm say something out of line here, but if you knew something and didn't do it, or you should have known and didn't do something, it kind of opens that door on you for liability if something happens. Correct or incorrect?
Correct.
Okay. For those of you on future video observations of this, I was told correct. So, he's just saying that. So again, we want to pay attention to what's kind of going on. We don't want to overlook something, give somebody the benefit of the doubt. If the old saying, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, there's a high probability that it's a duck. So we probably need to do our portion of the investigation and bounce it off somebody else, HR, another supervisor, whatever the case might be. So we're either not being paranoid that somebody's got a problem, or they're saying, no, you're seeing things that aren't there, if they don't have that same relationship. Obviously, we have a responsibility to the public in which we serve. The citizens expect that the City of Longmont vehicles driving around town have sober, safe drivers behind the wheel. Or the ones carrying guns are safe and sober, running around town with guns on their hip. or the ones administering, ironically, drugs to somebody who's dying are doing so in a sober fashion. Okay, so you get that expectation. They expect, the citizens have a right to expect that we are doing our jobs in a safe, sober manner. Again, you may face discipline if you fail to have adequately supervise, both internally and potentially civilly, if something were to happen. And you all, at one point, were not a supervisor, right? You were an employee, and there was maybe an employee somewhere that you heard of or experienced that they didn't do everything to the same standard or the expected standard of everybody else, and it just kind of got overlooked. Did that build a good family or a good relationship amongst all the employees? Kind of fosters a negative work environment that, oh, if I were to do that, I'd get fired, right? So they think there's that double standard. We need to hold everybody to the same standard. So what's your toolbox here? Administrative Regulation A29 is your very important tool in your supervisor toolbox. It's online. You can have it offline. You can print it out. And it's, again, you always have those allies, both all the representatives from risk, HR, and even legal to help clarify questions, and your fellow supervisors in your departments. Everybody's got the same working relationship. They can figure things out. So if we go to inside Longmont page, Business Support Supervisor Toolkit, you can see the Admin Reg Drug-Free Workplace right there. I'm not cool enough to have the website or the web page figured into my PowerPoint, so I just had to snapshot it and circle it for you. So if you go in, I don't know if the mouse works on this, but if you go up here, click the business support, you'll get this. Work your way down over here to the highlighted or circled drug-free workplace policy. You can pull it up and it will give you everything I'm about to talk about here. So, poor Calvetti, been drinking before work again. I suspect it for the first time ever. I'm going to go to Paul over here. I'm going to say, hey, Paul, I've supervised Calvetti for X amount of years, and we've had a really good relationship as employees, our fellow coworkers, all this time. And I have a really bad suspicion she's been drinking. Can you go verify that? Or can you go see if anything's wrong or anything stands out to you? You can even give them a non-leading something's up question like that. So you now get a second supervisor to go over and talk to Calvetti, and he comes back, says, yeah, her eyes are bloodshot, she's slurring her speech. Sounds like she's at the bar Friday night right now. Okay, good. I thought it was just me, and I didn't want to be like overly, coming down in that direction. But since now there's two of us, we can move on. With alcohol, I'm sure the majority of you have dealt with somebody who has consumed alcohol, maybe even to slight excess. So most of these signs and symptoms are going to be really obvious or familiar. So bloodshot eyes or dilated pupils. This is from the A29. I'm going to throw another one out there for you, but really constricted pupils. There's one drug category. We have 7 in what we call the drug recognition program. One of those categories is narcotics. So your Oxycontin, oxycodone, fentanyl, heroin, Dilaudid, Percocet, so on and so forth. If somebody's taking those pills, even sometimes to their prescribed dosages, their pupils are going to constrict. So we may be in a dark room or a dark hallway, but you look at their pupils and they're pinpoint, or they're smaller than they should be. I'm looking at Calvetti and I'm looking over at him, and he's got, normal indoor pupils, and I look over her and hers are like this, and I'm like, something ain't right. possibility she's taking a narcotic. Moderate to upper doses of a narcotic will also cause slurred speech. So slurred speech may come across in a lot of this. What do you think speech is going to be like for somebody taking meth or cocaine? Can be fast. It can be clenched jawed. Have you ever heard somebody try to talk with their jaw clenched? They're just trying to talk to you like this and they just won't let go. Like their jaw's wired shut. Their muscles are just in such spasm all the time from the drug that they can't articulate their jaw to make words. So that's a possibility. Or they're grinding their teeth. Big fad in the early 2000s, late 90s was, and it's still around, but MDMA and ecstasy. It's a amphetamine that causes hallucinations. So it's a stimulant that makes you see, hear, smell, and all kinds of fun things, different things. And one of the effects is clenching your jaw or grinding your teeth. It's called bruxism. What did the kids do back then? Pacifiers. Somebody's walking around with a pacifier nowadays. Might want to pay attention. Shakes or tremors. Again, some of this is the I'm currently intoxicated, and some of it may be I'm going through withdrawals. If somebody's on pain medications, which I have to get with our local populace and hopefully get an honest answer from them, our fentanyl users. But fentanyl is a ultra short or short acting drug. It only lasts 15 to 30 minutes, long enough for an ambulance to get you from the car crash or your broken leg falling off the ladder to the hospital. So they're smoking it. If it only lasts 30 minutes, that means the pain and everything, all the bad stuff comes back 30 minutes later, they have to smoke again. Which if they don't, they start getting the shakes or tremors. They're going through withdrawals. Heroin's the same way. If they're shooting up heroin, suddenly wearing long sleeves in the summer, but they don't work inside where it's cold for people that wear extra layers all year, that might be a clue. They might have track marks. Unexplained sweating or shivering. What might cause unexplained sweating? Standing in front of a large group of people giving a speech. Okay. Good answer. For those on the video, menopause was... I like it when you share a joke across the room. I know. Ironically, I found out, that wouldn't be the ironic part. That's the true part. The ironic part is there's actually, instead of hot flashes, there's the opposite, also possible in menopause, called basically chill or cold flashes. So I'm probably going to be dealing with my wife getting the cold ones because she was looking forward to the hot flashes. But anyway, inability to sit still. All right, who in here has enjoyed one of our numerous energy drinks available on the market today? Rockstar, Red Bull. Oh wait, what's it? Monster, Bang.
Celsius.
What's that?
Celsius.
Celsius. I haven't tried Celsius yet.
That's a good one. It's crack. Yeah.
There's a reason it's called crack. What's that weird one called? Triple shot venti. At Starbucks, triple shot venti. So you've got 3 espresso shots in your 20-ounce coffee that's already high. So according to, I believe it's the FDA, you're only supposed to consume no more than 300 milligrams of caffeine per day. All day. What does a triple shot venti have in it?
More
Not quite that. So a triple shot venti sits right about 350, 400. One shot. What does a 5-hour energy have in it? Remember, a triple shot venti is 20 ounces. 5-shot energy is 2-ish. It also has around 300 milligrams. I have a chart somewhere in my thumb drive of all the caffeine contents of everything. Anybody ever heard of high schoolers having a heart attack because they banged 4 bangs? Or 4 rock stars in an hour? Those are pushing 250, anywhere from 250 to 400 milligrams per can. The only drink that is regulated on how much caffeine it can contain is soda. A 12-ounce can or bottle, if they did 12-ounce bottles anymore, is only allowed to have up to 60 milligrams. And our high schoolers and middle schoolers are hitting cans, 4, 5, 6 cans a day that are packing 250 plus. They're going to have the jitters. They're going to look like they're on crack, because they basically are. Sleeping at work. I don't see the problem with that personally, but
Only when you're on stakeout. Wait, no, you're not supposed to sleep then.
it's a buddy system. You sleep while I watch. Unusual body or breath odor. If you've had, hopefully it's not any of our coworkers or employees or whatever across the city that you've come across that has a very noxious chemical breath smell, but you may have come across some of our citizens that have that walking around. Usually comes with no teeth because of the bruxism and the chemicals that are used to make meth. Deterioration in appearance or in grooming. Not showering for a few days might be a clue something's up. So, what do? Write it down. Because you will forget. When you go to call Beth or whoever over at HR to help you through this process, you're going to forget to mention something. And the more things that you notice as you're getting ready to call, and you jot down so that when you do call, you can say bloodshot, watery eyes, breath smells like alcohol, slurred speech, stumbling, she hasn't been injured or denies injury, 3 of those little Tito's, 1 shot, whatever it is, bottles laying outside by her car, his car, whatever the case might be. When you call over, all those little details are going to help. So again, zero tolerance in the city basically does mean that. Being a public entity, we want to retain the confidence the public has of us, unlike some cities have seen throughout the years. You can, once you screw up trust, it's hard to get it back, right? So we want to keep that level of trust up there. So the city will not knowingly hire or retain individuals who illegally buy, possess, or use or sell controlled substances as defined by either, catchy tune here, as defined by either federal or state of Colorado. So cannabis is illegal in Colorado. Is it legal federally? Not yet. So if somebody's using cannabis, even recreationally on the weekends, if it's their time, but they get in a situation where they have to provide a sample and they come up positive, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to be separated from the city. It also prohibits us from possessing alcohol in the workplace. So all my childhood influence of movies where the sergeant pulls open the drawer and pulls out the bottle so that he and his officers can, sort things out because it's been a rough day, flew out the window. So for the 4 drinks I have a year, can't do it at work. The city maintains zero tolerance rule with regard to this drug-free workplace policy. This is the part that specifically addresses medical or recreational marijuana in the workplace. Can you have a medical marijuana license and work for the city? Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? True, you can have a medical marijuana license. You cannot consume any medical or recreational cannabis products. There is a provision of selling in there. So you cannot possess, buy, use, or sell any controlled substances.
So they can have a license, but they can't sell it.
Well, to have a medical license means that you're getting a medical waiver to use cannabis. That's what was originally legalized in Colorado, was the medical marijuana license. So you had a medical reason for consuming cannabis. And when 17-year-olds were coming in for a medical marijuana license with their out-of-control back issues from their snowboarding issues, people finally realized this was more of a joke than it was worth. So if you read this portion of the statute, it literally tells you that it does not exempt an employee from the drug-free workplace policy. History question, trivia. Where does the drug-free workplace policy come from? Jeopardy's music. What's that? It's for federal funds. To receive federal funds, we have to have this policy in place. So when we say we, the city as a whole. All right. Legalese. If you should do something, do you have to do something? If this happens, you should do, if A happens, you should do B. Does that mean you have to do B? No. If A happens, then you shall do B. Is that you have to do it?
Yes.
That's a you have to. Shall is have to. Okay, so as a supervisor, you shall pursue an appropriate course of action, which may include, but is not limited to, the following. Should we find somebody that we believe is under the influence or in possession or whatever. So once you have reasonable suspicion that an employee is impaired by an intoxicant, the supervisor shall contact the employee's executive director as soon as possible. So whatever your executive director is of your department. Immediately. So we have a lot of immediatelys here going on, right? So it says you shall contact the executive director. Do you have to do that first thing? No. You have to. You have to notify your executive director, but immediately you need to get that person out of the work environment, if you will. Discreetly move them to a secluded, safe place so we can limit their ability to potentially hurt somebody else or themselves. So they're no longer doing their jobs. They're not on duty, but they're on the clock. I believe that for that time being, that's HR. Are they still on the clock when you pull them from the work floor, if you will? Until you tell them to go home? Okay. If most of us, I believe, are going to be during business hours, we'll talk about, so that's a work well. You'll take them down to work well. You are going to give them a ride. You or another supervisor are going to give that person a ride to work well for the testing. So they'll do a testing screen pursuant to the applicable testing procedures. There's where Workwell is if you haven't had the pleasure.
Their name's actually changed too
Yeah, well, it's still going to be work well. And every cotton tip thingy that you stick in your ear is a Q-tip. I don't care what it says. The thing you pull out of the top of the box on the table so you can blow your nose, that's a Kleenex. I don't care what the name says. Okay? If you have an after hours, some of your employees work after hours, obviously they put out frequently the after hours testing for accidents and or, in this case, reasonable suspicion type scenario. KCG Drug and Alcohol Solutions phone call, and they'll come in, take care of the testing procedure. So you can do so in a nice manner, but you are going to require them to take a test. This is not a negotiable thing. This is not a right to refuse sort of thing. Obviously, we're not going to go in and forcibly remove a sample, but you're telling them you have to do this. But what if they don't want to, or they refuse? You can answer that question, right? We'll get to that. If they don't want to give a sample, what's going to happen? It's considered a positive, and they will likely be fired. Not a nice thing to be thinking about. I mean, at this point, obviously, these are our coworkers, our quasi-families, but for the safety of the rest of the family, you shall take these precautions or these steps, right? So it's like you had the answer right in front of you, but it wasn't there yet. So it's a violation to refuse to take a substance screening ordered by a supervisor. So you can say please and all that stuff, but infer that it has to be done. I'm sure there's some language that they will help you with, that I'm ordering you to please take this test or whatever. It's not a nice topic at this point, but once they've completed the testing, the city will take the employee home or make other arrangements as appropriate. So, Calvetti is, I've seen Calvetti doing these things. I've taken her to testing. She goes back, gives her sample under the order that I have provided with the help of HR and everything else. Got to get her home, because we don't want to say we think she's intoxicated and then send her on her way to drive home, right? That would be bad for you. But, and just to put this in perspective, Calvetti and I have been coworkers for several years now. She's actually one of our DREs in the city for the PD, drug recognition experts. That's why I feel free to pick on her. But do I want to, as her supervisor, now drive her home by myself? Looks bad, right? So I want to grab another supervisor, preferably a female or somebody of the same gender, whatever the case might be, and take her home. So there's witnesses that we can document, and we can make sure she gets to a safe environment. There is an alternative. Bounce it off HR before you do anything outside of the scope, because they're going to be involved. They're on call, and fortunately like us sometimes. So you can make arrangements for, if they have family that's willing to come pick them up, that's acceptable, I believe, is what we discussed last time. So if we can turn them over to, kind of like when we release a drunk driver, after we've arrested them, we release them from the police department. I don't want to let them go to Uber or somebody that doesn't give a rip about them. So I'm going to release them to a sober adult who is a friend or family member. In this case, we'll want it to be a family member. Document who you turn them over to, so that we can say, well, we release it to boyfriend, husband, sister, mother, whatever, name and phone number, whatever. Gather all the info you can, just for your report, so they know who to call in case anything comes up. Questions there? I know it's the scary part of the whole class. So as far as PowerPoint goes, yes, we went to an hour 20 here. The PowerPoint portion is over. Cannabis, kratom, the fentanyl floating around on the streets. Employees may come across those things. But that's meth, throw meth in there. Those are probably the biggest ones we're seeing out on the streets, which means it's in our community, which means it's potentially in our workforce. Is there any questions anybody has about other drugs they've heard of or medications, anything like that? Any situations?
How long does some of the other drugs stay in the system? Because you talked about the marijuana goes the 30 days, it can kind of stay in the system, so P-test would still potentially show or would pop. But what about, like, I don't actually even know, like heroin, is it detectable weeks out?
So I don't believe it's weeks. I think it's only a couple days. It's hard to say for every specific drug to come in here, and to be honest with you, I'm not worried about the waste product and how long it stays in their system before they pee it out. Generally speaking, when we test somebody for impairment on the road, what we do is we test blood, because blood tells us, is it the original drug? So we'll just use marijuana or cannabis. So when it goes in, when we first smoke it, eat it, transdermal, absorb it, or whatever, however we get it in there. I don't want to think of other ways, but there are other ways. We get cannabis, the Delta-9 THC, into our system. It stays in our system, that actual Delta-9, for no more than about 30 or 45 minutes. The body instantly converts it to another thing called hydroxy-THC. So it's now converted within a half hour, 45 minutes of consumption to another psychoactive impairing substance. That quickly goes out of our system and is gone within about, I want to say an hour, 90 minutes. So 60 to 90 minutes. How long is a person high on cannabis? 3 to 4 hours. Now, interesting side note, where does all that stuff go? Why can't we see it? Why is it not in the blood? What's that? It's in tissue. Where does... Had to get one of the paramedics going here. Goes in the brain and goes in the fat. Cannabis, THC, loves fat. So it hides in our fatty tissue. So it's not circulating around the blood, which is why it takes 30 days to leach out. Once the body gets done processing all the usefulness it can get out of the Delta-9 and hydroxy, it goes to carboxy. And that's what floats around, and you're not high anymore, and it tests positive for 30 days as it leaches out of the fat. Hopefully nobody knows this one, but I'll throw it out there because you may have watched Miami Vice back in the 80s or the weird remake movie that they made in the 2000s. Cocaine. How long does cocaine keep a person high? What's that? God, I wish not. No. That'd be a heck of high. Huh? A little more than that. So cocaine, high on cocaine, generally speaking, while snorting it or encephalating it up the nose, 80s style, and then keep a person high anywhere from about 5 to 60 minutes.
7 days, holy.
Maybe it was really good stuff.
I'm being recorded here. I would like to keep comments non-punishable and non-punishable. But anyway, so meth is usually good for about 12 hours. So when somebody smokes meth right before bedtime, I question their sanity. It's like, it used to be drink a lot of Mountain Dew when I was a kid. 60 milligrams of caffeine. Psh, it's like chugging 4 bangs right before bed. So the problem with meth, and I don't know where 7 Days came from. Hopefully it was a movie or a story you heard about from a friend. But meth generally lasts 12 hours. They typically will smoke 6 to 9 hours into their high because they've got nothing better to do. They've already plucked their eyebrows and rearranged the bike that they stole. Stripped copper wire from somewhere. But unfortunately, we have a lot of examples of meth. There are functional people who consume meth, but eventually the need to take a little bit more to get that same high overtakes their productivity and their functionality, I guess is probably the better way of putting it. We used to have, I'm sure we still do have, at least a couple companies that contract for the city. Or not contract, I guess is the right word, but employees of non-city companies that use these drugs that interact with the police department. We'll just say there was a tow driver once that no longer lives in Longmont that you never would have known he uses meth until you started to know he used meth because he just kept having to do a little bit more. Fentanyl, again, is that 15, maybe 30 minutes you can stretch it. I have to ask about the smoking part. I haven't confirmed the length of that, but IV is generally that 15-minute that the paramedics are going to do. They do fentanyl lollipops. Anybody ever had a family member, loved one, friend that gets the lollipop? They had surgery, so they need a short-acting, but they can't take anything, ingest it, so they get the lollipop to suck on, so they get fentanyl that way. There's a transdermal patch. Does everybody want to be grossed out? Anybody not want to be grossed out? It's not terribly gross, but when you think about it, it's gross. Okay. Got to go there now. Only one partial waiver. So the fentanyl patches used to be used a lot in the nursing homes. I think they might still be, but they have to dispose of them now in a different way. They used to just throw them away until a certain group of people would go dumpster diving and chew on the patches that had been on grandma for a week. So that's as gross as I'm going to get. It's gross enough, apparently. So, yes, when you get addicted to things, you do bad idea things. What other questions were there?
Just to clarify, as a supervisor, I'm looking for reasonable suspicion of illegal things or impairment or medical emergency. Like when does that process kick in?
That process kicks in when something seems off.
Just in general.
In general, whether it's the question was, when does the reasonable suspicion portion essentially kick in? I'll relate that question to what I do as a police officer. Asked in court by a defense attorney, how many drunk driving investigations have you done? Well, every time I pull over a car, it's a potential drunk driver, right? So every time I show up at work, I potentially have coworkers around me that have consumed. Now, I'm not going to go actively looking for it, but if something stands out that someone looks a little odd today, that's that hunch. And then you walk by and you get the whiff of alcohol, or you find the pill bottle, or you find some sort of unknown type pipe. So reasonable suspicion is going to kick up essentially when there's a hunch that moves up into, now you need to either, yes, it's an issue, or no, that hunch was bogus and he or she or they are acting funny because mental health or some other thing. Then we can go down, they need to get some help. We have resources to help. Now, we also have resources to help with addiction issues, But if they're on the job impaired, that's where the reasonable suspicion, now we need to start focusing on, they've showed up to work in this condition and we need to take action, because what's one of the first things you sign when you come here? This is a drug-free workplace policy. I have read it, I understand it. It probably hasn't changed since probably 84 when it was adopted. I don't know, it is in the 80s. So you can't say, well, I didn't know it changed. Every employee has signed it. Temporary, full-time, part-time. So is that...
Kind of to dovetail on her question.
Okay.
She had mentioned an illegal substance.
Okay.
You were the one that shared with me the story about the caffeinated DUI arrest.
There have been caffeinated DUI arrests. So
not necessarily an illegal substance, but you might have that.
Exactly. That's where the medications also come in. If we have a, particularly safety sensitive, but if we have a job dealing with the public where we may have medications that prevent us from operating at full function, what are we required to do as employees? We have to disclose just enough that I am taking a medication, that I cannot come to work and perform my duties today due to this medication. Probably have a doctor's note to go with it, provide it to your supervisor, so on and so forth, so that they're not expecting you to come to work however long. They might find, again, non-safety positions, safety-sensitive positions for you to work in if that's the field you work in. That would be an HR question. But as an employee, I am required, if I take an intoxicating or a substance that may impair my abilities, to notify my supervisor, not of what the medication necessarily is or what the condition I'm taking it for is, but that I cannot do my job and have doctor note proof saying Chris can't do his job or can't be on the street for X amount of days while he takes this med. So that's the legal substance, the caffeine. There have been caffeine DUI arrests in Colorado that were convicted. 4 bangs in an hour or 4 monsters in an hour is a good example. Driving like they're on meth, so, or a teenager. Or a teenager on meth. Oh. Or cocaine. So illegal substances, any substance that impairs our ability to operate a vehicle safely or do our job safely. I know, cop stuff. Any other questions?
When an employee calls you as a supervisor and says, hey, I'm on this, and it says, I shouldn't until I know how I'm going to react on it, and I feel fine.
Okay. So if an employee gets a new prescription that says use caution while operating heavy machinery or driving until you know how your body reacts to this medication. My expectations of what I do aren't necessarily what an employee is supposed to do. I'll defer to Beth for a solid answer on what I would do if I got a new medication that said, you know, give it a couple days to figure out what's going on. I need a note from you, doc, saying that I need a couple days because I'm on a new medication that may or may not impair my ability to operate a vehicle safely. Give that to my boss, say, hey, I'm on a medication that I can't drive or carry a gun for a couple days, so here's my notice, I'm taking the week off. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, you want to make sure you have a conversation with your doctor and talk about, you know, the impairment of this particular prescription. Also, some, you know, legal prescriptions can actually, if you got tested, could throw positive drug screen. So you really want to, you know, we can't tell you how long something's going to last in your body, the impairment. But yeah, you have to be careful because the way we test now, it's all about the test. So, you know, it could be prescribed and legitimate, but if you do have a test and it's positive, for one of the drugs that we test for, it's positive, then you will lose your job.
That's a question, Nick.
Sure.
Is it possible the city looks into the option of blood testing as opposed to urine if the employee chooses that because of what Chris described as what can still be in your system? And whereas blood is more immediate, what's in your system?
Yeah, we haven't discussed that, but
We discussed it in Harold's team meeting last week about going to blood testing.
Okay.
Because in fact, Chris was involved in some text strings around marijuana in your system, out of your system, active ingredients, not active.
It's just
Yeah, it's under review to
Yeah.
move to that, and I think there's some question about, can we mandate employees to do blood tests? We have to look into the legalities of that, but we're thinking about it.
Can it be their option?
Again, I think we're looking at all these
Exploring.
permutations.
You're such a lawyer.
Depends, it depends.
Related to that, is there ever follow-up testing? You mentioned false positives. If I come up for methadone and I say, yeah, I've never used methadone, I want a second test to prove that.
So, presumably based on that question, you've never tested positive in this workplace. For those of you that haven't gone through a process with an employee or anything like that, or are taking this class as a newer supervisor, a couple things happen when an employee goes in for testing. When they provide the urine sample, and it's a reasonable suspicion. I'm of the understanding that they also do a PBT, or a portable breath test, which is there on site to go with the urine. So they're testing for alcohol on the breath, and then whatever other drugs might be in the urine. If they get a rapid test with a positive, they're going to potentially, and whoever correct me on the process, they're going to get with the employee and maybe find out, do you take any medications that may test positive for, say, amphetamines? Because there are legal medications prescribed by doctors that will test in the same category as methamphetamine, because they're amphetamine. They're cleaner. So the employee is going to probably disclose that, yeah, I'm taking Adderall for my ADHD at this dosage, and the doctor that reviews the urinalysis and the gas chromatograph process when they test what's in the urine through the fancy machine versus the rapid test that you can get at Walgreens essentially. They're going to quantify it, and they're going to go, okay, he's taking in a prescription for amphetamine, he brought it into work well, and show whatever their name is now, and show, he's taking, I don't know what the proper dosage for him. What's an Adderall dosage normally range? 10 to 50? I'm making this up. I'm making it up. So 10 to 50 is a normal range, and it says I take 10 milligrams every day for my ADHD. And the amount that it shows quasi-quantitatively is not spiking or anything. They're going to say, okay, that seems legitimate. If they say, well, I take Adderall for my ADHD, but there's some other metabolites in the urine, then the doctor at the screening place is going to go, something's not right here. And this happens before even they get the final results. So there's several checks and balances on both sides. Input, corrections.
That's correct. And then the administrative regulations, like, how's that process?
So it's in the 829, fairly close. Other questions? Spice up your workplace. Say, okay, we're just going. I'm kidding. Don't do this. All right, we're going to go through the process. Come with me. No. Then you find out something bad happened. So I'm going to throw out there, the police department now has 5 DREs, 5 drug recognition experts. I'll tout the process until we have blood or something else on board. Obviously, an employee would have, I believe, going back to your question of does the employee have the right to have blood drawn? Maybe not part of our process, but there's nothing that stops the employee from getting in the car with their wife, going to their doctor and saying, I need a blood draw for testing purposes because I'm being accused of being impaired at work. They can do testing afterward so they can defend themselves. It's just kind of like our legal process, but it's not something necessarily the city's going to recognize or take the results of. But you have your right to give a sample to whomever you want once you're out off the clock. I've been asking about the blood process for a while because of the DRE program, and I have been asked to evaluate employees post-crash. It's not necessarily reasonable suspicion, but I have been asked to do a post-collision drug evaluation for employees because maybe something did show positive in the fast or rapid test. And so before the doctor saw everything, they wanted to get the city, the employers or the supervisors wanted to get essentially kind of a overall assessment at the time. I'm not going to say call the police department, ask for a DRE. I'll say if something's up and they seem fine, but something's popping right away and they're like, I haven't taken anything, this thing's wrong. Get with Beth or whoever and see if that's an option. If they're willing. If they're like contesting, I'm not impaired, I want to prove I'm not impaired, let's do an evaluation right now, or I want to go get to my doctor so I can give blood. It's an option, and Beth and everybody at the back table can make the assessment if that's some way we want to go, because urine is a waste product, and it was the fastest, cheapest government way of putting this policy in place. Plus, a needle in the arm is intrusive. To forcibly remove blood from somebody on a DUI stop, I have to have a warrant. Breath test, I can passively hold something in front of them and test that they have alcohol in their breath. But I can't quantify it that way. So there are different standards, and that's why the lawyer in the back is going through and saying it's on the table being considered, because I don't even know, I think I've only found one other jurisdiction that went to blood across the U.S., at least that's announced it. So, because it's more expensive. But when it's, did this person test positive? Yes. Were they impaired? Not based on the blood results, because these are the actual numbers. Urine doesn't tell you anything other than it's there a lot or it's there some, but you can't really quantify it as far as intoxication levels. Any other questions?
I have one.
One more, all right.
I don't practice in the criminal law area, and so when you test a driver for impaired driving and they show up for marijuana, is there a legal cutoff like there is for alcohol?
So Colorado sort of has that. It's called a permissible inference for Delta 9 THC, because they haven't updated the law because of the cannabis lobby. But so the permissible inference is 5 nanograms of Delta 9 THC for driving, which basically means if you are at or above the 5 nanograms, so 5 millionths of a gram, the jury can make the inference that you're impaired, but they don't have to. Which is kind of tough because it has that 30 to 45 minute window while it's converting rapidly to hydroxy THC, which is in the system a little bit longer after that, an hour-ish, before it disappears and the person's high for approximately 3 to 4 to 5-ish hours, maybe 6.
We've
So-
also had cases that went the other way, right?
What's
That
that?
were lower than 5 nanograms, yet we charged based on their impairment.
Yeah, so what we charge is based on so that's where, at least in the criminal side, that's where the DREs come in handy, because DREs have been studied since the late 70s, shortly after the SFST program was established. The DRE program came along and kind of expanded into other drugs than alcohol. And we can document the impairment that is still visible, not only physiologically on the multitasking type stuff, but also the physiological effects of pulse and heart, blood pressure, pupil size, and things like that. Because there's still a physiological response in the body, what's going on, that shows up while a person's high. And we've actually seen where they've come down far enough where the drug is still kind of affecting the physiological, but they're doing all the multitasking, the walk and turn, one leg stand, and that sort of stuff perfectly fine. So it's like, yeah, I could see where they were there, but at least now when I'm testing them 2 hours later, they're okay. So we are, like everything else, another useful tool. And we get told that by some public all the time, that we're tools. At least I got a snicker out of a few of you. All right. So my name's Chris. For the email, it's Christopher with a K, Ford. If you have any questions you don't want to bring up right now, you can email them to me, or if you have questions later, certainly do that. Last chance to be on the video. All right.
Drag this out. So my understanding is people in safety-sensitive positions, if they're in an accident, automatically are supposed to go get a urine test, regardless of reasonable suspicion. If there is a reasonable suspicion, can they then refuse to take that test?
So the question is, a person in a safety-sensitive position involved in a crash, but there is no reasonable suspicion that they're intoxicated, still has to provide a test, correct? And if they refuse to take the post-collision test, what are the ramifications for that? So, being this is a reasonable suspicion, and I used to confuse people by trying to use the post-collision example with reasonable suspicion. I took most of that out, but I believe they're double-checking things right now. I believe if you are involved in at least going back to my mind, are you there?
Yeah, damage to property or any vehicle where the damage is 1,000 or more,
Or injury.
Yeah. Any person injured in the accident needed medical attention away from the scene, or if fatality occurred, you're going to be tested.
You shall be tested. So you cannot refuse that one either.
You still can't.
I believe a refusal is considered a positive test in a post-collision.
Yeah.
Correct, because it's policy that if it reaches this dollar amount or injuries, that you have to test.
Regardless of the safety-sensitive designation.
Regardless of the safety-sensitive designation. So if you're driving your personal vehicle on an errand for, picking up something at Office Max or something like that, and you get involved in a collision, you may fall under that guidance.
So it's $500, and there's no reason suspicion, you wouldn't be asked to take the test.
Exactly. Even if you are in a safety-sensitive position.
I thought if you're in a safety-sensitive position, they would apply.
That's a CDL. I believe a CDL, if you're in a collision, regardless, you have to. Okay, so the question is, if you're involved in a collision, we'll break it down to 3. There's reasonable suspicion or there's not.
Reasonable suspicion applies to anyone.
At any time.
If it's $1,000 combined damage, city property and private property, if it exceeds that dollar amount and you're safety sensitive, then there's mandatory testing on that, and that's regardless of fault. So if I'm at a stoplight and I'm safety sensitive and I get rear-ended and the combined damage to city property and private property is $1,000 or more, then I'm going to have to be tested. Doesn't matter if it's fault. And CDL falls under that because they're safety sensitive.
Okay.
Right, but if it's under that dollar threshold, if you're safety sensitive,
still have to get it tested.
No. If you're under that $1,000,
Okay.
then you're not going to be tested.
And to be clear, same with CDL. I can have a CDL, and if I get in a $100 accident, I don't have to get tested.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, 5.03 in the admin reg has a column A and a column B.
Yeah.
And so you have to have
There's criteria.
one criteria in, at least one in column A and one in column B to be tested. So it's a good idea to look at that.
So it's like safety
And that's under
sensitive.
which policy?
So the admin reg 29 and it's section 5.03.
So same policy, 503.
That $1,000 has been there forever. And $1,000 like now is
There's a headlight.
yeah.
damage.
So like, how about an inflation adjustment?
Since 1984.
Yeah, and that's been talked about a lot, and Chief Souter might be able to maybe clarify this a little bit, but I thought it was designed to be tied into what is defined on the state level as a crash.
Right.
Is that correct?
I think so, and we look at this, and this came up in our last meeting with Harold of adjusting that. So they are looking at that, but I think it's defined by the state, if I recall correctly, that this is what they define as a crash.
Theft up to $1,000, shouldn't it be?
Yeah, but everybody in the meeting was like, yeah, that's a headlight or a taillight right now. And I'll just throw out on reasonable suspicion. If you crash your car on reasonable suspicion, Chris said our DREs may be there anyway as a criminal side.
Good point. So don't get in a crash and present reasonable suspicion to your supervisor. That's a whole nother class. Because then you'll get to see the civil and criminal side of things, potentially. I think with that, we're going to end the session. If you want to come up and ask any additional questions, I'll be here for a few as we clean up. So I appreciate your attention and participation as we put together this training class. Have a good one.